So this is part B of the Khoodeelaar television channel conducting world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. And we are doing this on the day after the confession to lying made by Dominic Cummings. Now, Cummings, over the last the last 3 years has been featuring as a leading, if not the leading member of the gang. And it is absolutely untrue untruthful of the financial crimes to call him ex-aide. It is Cummings who operated Boris Johnson. That was the printed, published, admitted line. So to call him ex-aide is completely factually wrong and misleading. And to say that he has turned on number 10 is also untrue and misleading. So we shall be spending most of the edition on this one. So they're saying that it's like two parties. It's not two parties at all. It is an admission. Now, Fleet Street should know that it is an admission because it has been known to the victims of the massacres and the families. And both Fleet Street has known that and lied about this occurring in the way that it has occurred. So this is the admission which shows that there was an intention. There was an intention to allow as many people to die as they have been, as they have done. So that's the Daily Mirror, and the I newspaper says tens of thousands of people died who didn't need to die. Now that is the most kind of underwhelming statement, underrating the actual casualties, the impact. And what they're saying, they're presenting him as a stranger. Well, this person, Dominic Cummings, has not been a stranger. He has been the center of the operation. And the operation concerning the confession to all the lies and lying have been, the lies have been connected with the biggest lie that has been perpetrated for centuries, for the biggest lie that has been perpetrated on the domestic indigenous people in Britain. This lie is unprecedented. The set of lies about Brexit and the set of lies about the COVID-19 and the statement that Dominic Cummings confirmed yesterday in his admission had been made by Boris Johnson, and Cummings said that he heard Johnson say that let the bodies, let the people die in their thousands and let the bodies pile up. He heard that. And the way they're painting him, they're portraying him, is wrong because it's not another party, it's the main HQ, if you like, of the operation of the Brexiteers and the murderers, mass murderers of the ordinary people. And as the analysis based on evidence shows, for example, the current contemporary running kind of evidential sources for basing the assertion that there is no such thing as British justice, or there is no such thing as justice in Britain. The operation of the UK state, the British state, has been against the interests of justice and hostile to justice. There is no audit, there is no accountability, there is no regulation anywhere. So the absence of that is not an accident. The political culture in Britain is very much based on the assumption that the majority of the many are powerless to do anything to overthrow the system. So the system is intentionally, deliberately unjust, unfair, and brazen and arrogant. And this is evident every single day. The people of Hillsborough, the Hillsborough Stadium massacre of the fans, mainly from Liverpool, took place more than 30 years ago. And almost 30 separate probes, investigations, even short trials like the prosecution jokes took place, and not a single person responsible for the massacre has been found guilty or held accountable. This would not happen if the racist hatred were applied. For example, any number of so-called terrorists or radicals or whatever. We don't know any details from any personal contact or any direct contact knowledge. But the persistently published accounts by Fleet Street and the counterpart media in the so-called regions show that whenever a perpetrator, a murderer, a killer is either suspected of being a member of the population with origins in Africa or Asia, is prosecuted and charged with the murder or the deaths of people, they're inevitably found guilty. But when the victim of the crime or crimes is or are people of African and Asian origin, then the murderers, the the perpetrators are hardly found guilty. So the pattern goes on. It's not an accident. And when thousands of people are killed as directly resulting from the policy that was brought in place by Johnson and Cummings advising him, there is nothing, there is no consequences for the murderers. Instead, today, the day after Cummings made the confession, the anti-confessionals have been getting increasing kind of platform on the media. And the Haque, the so-called health secretary, who has been openly reported as having been a crook because he allowed his mate or mates to get millions and millions of pounds worth of business contract at the expense of the victims of the COVID-19, and under the cover of doing service for the victims of COVID-19. Matthew Crook. Crook is the name we have added to his name. So Hancock has been edited to read Crook. And this is not a bombshell by Cummings against Johnson. It is a bombshell of diversion. Because in giving the coverage to him, Fleet Street is not mentioning in any way that can be visible in the big headlines and the big kind of subheadings and images that he was the one that was running the show. So much so that when he went to Durham by breaching the very rules about lockdown that had been applicable to the many, Dominic Cummings, historically, without any precedent, was allowed his own display of defiance in what can only be called the kind of, what can it be called? The previous occasion when that particular space was used for promoting, for propaganda of the condemn collusion was in May 2010 when Sick Clegg and Sleazeball Cameron made a joint appearance to defy all reason and disbelief and to stage a boastful exhibition of the collusion that had begun. So that was the space which Cummings used in 2020 after he was caught breaking the rules, going to Durham. And the details are not necessary to be repeated because the details are accessible. I mean, the visit of Barnard Castle near Durham was excused or explained as being necessary for the purpose of Dominic Cummings testing his eyesight. Absurdities like that were allowed to be perpetrated without any objection of any significance by ordinary members of the parliament. And there was nothing really memorable that came from the so-called opposition as fronted by K.R. Starmer. And Starmer remains dead politically to this day, a year on since that corruption and defiance by Cummings. And these displays, this is the Guardian. The Guardian is displaying him as more animated and more emotionally charged than he really was when the video of his appearance before the Science and Technology Subcommittee, Select Committee of the Members of Parliament is watched. He doesn't come across anything like that animated. He comes across more like this. And whatever the Guardian, the Daily Mail, the I newspaper are showing Cummings to be representing, it is not the truth that they're concerned about. It's the contrast, is the appearance of drama and the appearance of sensation, which by definition is not going to last, let alone be used or usable as evidence for lessons that need to be learned. That is a phrase. Lessons are never learned in Britain. So what I'm going to say in the next paragraph, if you like, is that all the suspension of morality, ethics, integrity, accountability, universality, answerability, all those things are suspended. All those values are suspended by the establishment that is made up of habitual congenital liars and lawbreakers, and generally holders of the public in contempt, the likes of whom are exemplified, embodied by Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings. So all the Fleet Street smart ones noted yesterday, early on when he was beginning to give his evidence, they noted that he had made a comment at one stage beginning saying that he was not a smart person. He said that I'm not a smart person. Well, the smart is there. The concept of smart was there. And we shall check the actual quoted statement and then update accordingly. Now, this program, Khoodeelaar Television Channel, Khoodeelaar is the name of the campaign that defended the community successfully against the UK central government attack on Brick Lane in the east end of London by plotting to dig a big hole in the middle of Brick Lane. Now, Brick Lane is in the same area, or in fact, Brick Lane is the area in terms of the society, in terms of the commentary and the narrative, that corresponds to the area that is called Spitalfields. Now, the word Spitalfields and the word Brick Lane, the word Spitalfield and the word Brick Lane refer to the same geographical area, but they differ by thousands of years, if you like. Brick Lane is associated, although there are other people with other backgrounds, but Brick Lane is associated with the Bangladeshis, the Siloti-speaking Bangladeshis, to be precise, as the attack on Brick Lane and the Siloti-speaking Bangladeshi Muslims carried out by the Sunday Times Color magazine in their edition of the 2nd of December 1973 refers to. And that is the persistent kind of reference. So the Brick Lane is a reference to the Bangladeshis, the Siloti-speaking Bangladeshi, the Muslims, and Spitalfields refers to the racists kind of resort. They hide under the church, which is also called Spitalfields, and they identify themselves as being indigenous, white, mainly Anglo-Saxon, but they're not, because they include a lot of people who are not Anglo-Saxon, who are of Jewish origin, etc., but they're white European people. So when the UK central government began legislation that included a plot to dig a hole for the Crossrail line in the middle of Brick Lane, I organized the campaign, the Khoodeelaar campaign, and I gave the name Khoodeelaar, Siloti word, in order to get the message across right away to the Siloti Bangladeshi people in Brick Lane and in East London, and by definition in the rest of the UK, and as it happened, throughout the Western European continental kind of places where Siloti-speaking Bangladeshi people were settled or were struggling to settle and had come from mainly Bangladesh over decades. And we successfully campaigned legally, constitutionally, ethically, morally, democratically, transparently against that plot. And we defeated the central government, and we defeated the central government's agents in the form of the local so-called elected Tower Hamlets Council. Now that took place despite the fact that the council, UK central government, big business, the London Assembly, and so on, are all, and the MPs until one MP changed in May 2005. So the two MPs that were supporting the UK central government plot to attack Brick Lane were Una King for Bethnal Green and Bow constituency, and Jim Fitzpatrick for Poplar and Limehouse. What is Poplar and Limehouse now? That constituency's name has been changing quite often, quite frequently. So what we did in the campaign against Crossrail Hole was to target the MPs concerned, the council and the councillors concerned, the Greater London Assembly, the mayor at the expense of London, the various members of parliament who were tokenistically recruited to form the Crossrail Hybrid Bill Select Committee to give the appearance of democratic scrutiny of the bill before it became legislation. And we also, at the ending kind of phase of that particular program, targeted the House of Lords equivalent of the Select Committee of Peers. Now, every time we say Lords, viewers must assume that we are saying that within a quotation. And what we did by defeating those particular manifestations of the UK state was unique on several levels. First of all, no campaign by members of the ordinary public or by members of the public that would belong to the many in the general definition. No campaign mobilized, organized, coordinated, devised, and advanced by any members of the ordinary population, either in Tower Hamlets or in the next door boroughs of Hackney, Newham, or beyond, Barking and Dagenham, Redbridge, whatever. You go further east, and there is absolutely no evidence, there is no precedent, there is no record of any constitutional, legal, democratic, ethical, moral, transparent campaign against any plan or policy by any regime, either Labour or Conservative, in the UK that has been similarly carried out and similarly kind of effective in stopping the plan, in stopping the attack, which we have done. That is the one particular target, the stopping of the Crossrail hole. But the agenda, the mobilizing purpose behind the particular Khoodeelaar campaign included other aspects of Brick Lane, other aspects of Tower Hamlets, other aspects of East London. And those aspects are very much in need of being addressed and campaigned about. Some of the things that we have been talking about in the context of the confession by Dominic Cummings yesterday. The confession being displayed as a hostile act by elements that want to shore up the political career of Boris Johnson. Now, whatever the actual sophisticated distinctions made by the liars in Fleet Street, or liars editing, or liars in charge of the agenda of Fleet Street papers, whatever the sophisticated kind of reasons, essentially, those are diversionary. Those are created by diversionary intents. And the diversionary intent is to spare Boris Johnson all likely kind of penalties and consequences for his lies and lying, and his racism and his incompetence and his disrespect for the people, the many of the people that have been murdered by the negligent policies, the brazenly negligent policies that Boris Johnson gave verbal expression to, as Cummings yesterday admitted. Cummings admitted yesterday that he heard Boris Johnson say that particular phrase that let the bodies pile high, thousands of bodies pile high. Now that was not very far from the statement made by a white kind of male. That is the assumption, white male. Could be a white female. Who said, who swore, that is a phrase that says, we are F XXXXED. Thousands of people are going to die. That is the expression. And Johnson said he didn't care. Let thousands of bodies piled high in the streets. So those are the two kind of different parts of the same statement, let's say, same agenda, same narrative, same policy decision made by Johnson and his cabal, which featured Dominic Cummings as the main and the most influential member of the cabal. Why influential? Because very early on, when Johnson arrived at number 10 Downing Street, an Asian Muslim woman who was in place as a member of the staff in the incoming regime fronted by Boris Johnson. That woman, Muslim woman of Pakistani origin, was given literally a marching order, physically, in effect, assaulted by Dominic Cummings and his thugs, given the power and the license by Boris Johnson to behave as they did. And the woman was physically marched out of number 10 Downing Street and out of the premises, out of the estate of Downing Street and into the street. That was done by Dominic Cummings. That event doesn't feature anywhere in the so-called coverage in the so-called newspapers in Fleet Street today. And it will be a few days before the actual transcript is available or published of the evidence that he gave. And it is only going to be after reading the whole completely published transcript, which is not published as I speak now, that we can comment whether that incident is part of what he said. Because trying to monitor, that is to say, watch the live stream of the session that contained Cummings' appearance before the particular committee of MPs, select committee of MPs. Trying to watch the live streaming was not tenable, was not sustainable, because unlike the Guardian and the Mail saying that he was very animated, Cummings was not very animated. It would be a long stretch to describe the session in which he gave the evidence as animated session. The other thing is that Cummings did accept or admit or confess to the fact that he was not a smart person. Now that is very clear that he is not just about the contents of what he did in the pandemic and the Brexit thing, but also in the choice of various phrases, etc., that he's done now on the record, that constitute together, when taken together, all these tactics come across as Cummings still serving the same agenda as Johnson is doing. So far from exposing or toxic explosion of revelation against Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings was making a confession on his behalf as well as on behalf of Boris Johnson. And Cummings has not distanced himself from any of the remarks that he had made before he appeared before this MP's committee, because Cummings had made a number of racist kind of remarks, but they were not being probed in the questions by the MP's committee chair, Greg Clark, yesterday. And what they left out was all the absence of otherwise legally necessary process and procedures and steps. Despite the fact that Cummings was exposed in the confession by Cummings as a habitual liar, unfit for that reason to hold the post of Prime Minister. That is there in the statement. But still, whatever Cummings said, everything Cummings said is part of the confession on behalf of the cabal. That includes Johnson and Cummings and others. And the fact that it is a confession and not an actual interrogation is to be treated as a very significant fact indeed. And we shall be continuing to examine in this kind of detail the rest of the coverage and cover-ups and the rest of the consequences